Hello, everyone. Dr. Stillman here with Jim Laird on this Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day. Thank you to those of you who have served. Thank you to those of you who are currently serving. Thank you to those of you currently putting up with people who are currently serving. Jim, you want to add anything to that before we jump in?
No, I think you covered all of it.
Very good. Quote of the day: the only thing that interferes with my learning is my education. Albert Einstein said that. And the reason I picked this quote today is that what we wanted to talk about is how trauma really affects the body. This is one of the things that we see least understood by the general public. It is an extremely common scenario for Jim or I to be contacted by someone who has some kind of chronic musculoskeletal pain, pick your poison, knee pain, back pain, neck pain, headaches, TMJ, any kind of bodily pain. And they'll say, oh, yeah, and we saw this, that, and the other thing on my insert imaging study here. Ultrasound, X-ray, CT scan, MRI, whatever. And we'll hear that and we'll listen to them and we'll let them finish. But in the back of our minds, we're thinking most imaging findings, whether it's a bone spur or an area of calcification or decalcification or a ligament that's inflamed or a disc that's slipped or bulging, is actually artifact. And what I mean by artifact is it is there, it is an imaging finding, but it is not responsible for the patient's pain, discomfort, or dysfunction. And this bakes people's noodles so thoroughly that telling them this often alienates them from working with you. They say, no, my doctor said this, my therapist said that. It was my gallbladder stuck up under my 11th rib, or it was my Achilles tendon that was calcified or infected with some weird thing. We hear this all the time. We see it all the time. And when you get people moving properly, drinking good water, getting sunlight, or using light therapy, eating a wholesome diet, and you get them to deal with their psychological issues, you see these pains and aches disappear, because that's what really cures trauma that's stored in the body. And that's my opening. Jim.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You look at the people who have like limb amputations and they have like phantom pain. And you look at some of the research that's been done on like imaging, for example. You talked about imaging. I mean,
by the way, Jim, I got to jump in and just mention that as I was telling the part about how it alienates people from working with us, the number of people on the stream watching it live dropped in half.
I went from like, well, hey, there you go. If you look at imaging studies that they've done, and they take like, 1,000 people in pain, and then they take 1,000 people that didn't have pain and they image them. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, the people with pain, some of them have perfect imaging, right? And then the people that don't have pain, some of them have, torn this, torn that,
right.
Ruptured this, ruptured that. So there's a lot more to pain than just physical things. And a lot of pain has to do with the strategy that the body is stuck in. And a lot of pain has to do with, compressive strategies, people using compressive strategies to function, right?
Would you unpack that for a minute? Because, when you first started using this lingo with me, I just smiled and nodded. Mm-hmm. And had no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah, if you go back onto Dr. Stillman's YouTube channel and look at some of the original interviews we did together while I was still living in Freeport, and if you listen, like I'm talking about high threshold strategies and extended strategies, compression strategies, and Dr. Stillman is looking at me like I'm from Mars, right?
Politely looking at you like you're.
So the body has. I'm going to try and explain this in a way that people can understand, because it's very foreign. Because the current model is that lever model, right? And if you look at the body, and I've got this way of thinking from a guy named Bill Hartman, who's so smart, my head hurts when I talk to him. But he's been a good friend and colleague for years. And you basically, if you look at, he always uses the analogy of the Jiffy Lube, the Jiffy Lube mascot that's at the Jiffy Lube. It's filled up with air. We're basically a giant sack of guts and water. And that's basically how we move, right? By shifting pressure, by shifting our guts around. Of course, there's the whole, if you look at the body electric, there's the electric component to it and all this good stuff. So it gets a little interesting. But your ability to move is based on your ability to change the shape of your skeleton, right? And people will get into like, well, this muscle's weak or that muscle's weak, when 99% of the time it's your body can't get into the position that it needs to get into for that muscle to actually be able to do its thing. Rommel, my dog. So, go ahead. You can put the collar on him. Thank you. Rommel's really excited to play catch.
Unlike most things you watch or see on television.
So what happens is, your body has like blood pressure, right? Is high blood pressure bad? Not if I'm chasing you with a machete. Okay. Now, if you're walking around or you're trying to go to sleep, high blood pressure is bad. Is low blood pressure good? Not if I'm chasing you with a machete. It's the same thing with movement. Okay. A high threshold strategy where you're arching, okay, and you're using this over breathing strategy is great for force production, running away from emergency, like a threat, a fight situation. That's amazing. Okay. Because of our modern life and the chronic, like low level stress we're under, a lot of people are walking around using a strategy that you would use to deadlift 600 pounds. And over time, when you're in that compressive strategy where you're basically locked into this extended pattern, or you're using compression to get stability and you're not able to relax and you're not able to breathe normally, that basically cuts the body's ability to get fluid and nutrients into certain areas of the body. That's why you see the low back and the hips end up basically having all sorts of issues, because people are using their low back to basically jam into to get their stability from.
Right.
So that's why it's really important with a strength training program, unless your goal, like it's like a top fuel dragster, right? In order to go as fast as possible in a straight line, the top fuel dragster does not steer well. Like the only steering it can do is in a straight line. So the more force production you want to create, the more comfort, like a Lexus is very comfortable. It's a great car. Now, if you wanted to make the Lexus more like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, if you've ever been in a Ferrari or Lamborghini or McLaren, which I have many times, they are not comfortable. It's like driving down the street with no suspension. Some of the newer ones are better, but the faster the vehicle, the less comforts there's going to be, generally speaking. So when you start adding performance onto things, you start taking away certain elements. There's always trade-offs with everything, right? So part of when you work with somebody who's not a high-level athlete, it's a matter of saying, okay, we want to add some strength, but we want them to be able to show and generate this strength and power, but we want them to be able to shut it off. So like when you're walking down the street, you're using a relaxed strategy where your pelvis is moving back and forth, your rib cage is moving back and forth. You're not using that rigid, locked-in deadlift strategy where your pelvis is locked, your rib cage is locked, because then, you're walking like, most bodybuilders and powerlifters do, like a fire hydrant, right? So we want to make sure that we're using the appropriate strategy for the task at hand. And a lot of times with trauma, especially things like PTSD or accidents, people get stuck in a high threshold strategy and they can't turn it off. And that's why the float tank is so successful with post-traumatic stress disorder. Same with things like neurofeedback, because it helps people get out of that strategy, and then also working on improving people's breathing mechanics so they can relax. Because most of the people in our modern world are over breathers. They have, they're not spending enough time in nature. They're not spending enough time doing low-level activities. They become chair athletes. They're not good at shifting their pressure side to side. Things get locked in place, and they're not very good at changing the shape of their skeleton, and that kind of gets them in trouble.
Exactly. So let's unpack all of that, right? So with trauma, right, people will go through an event, a series of events, a time in their life where, and I won't get into academic definitions of trauma, but these traumatic events, traumatic episodes, what happens when your body perceives a threat is that it activates your sympathetic nervous system, right? And that sympathetic nervous system runs through your thoracic spine, it turns on and actually innervates your adrenal glands. So, it's funny. People talk about adrenal burnout, adrenal glands. They talk about fight and flight all the time. But the reality is a lot of people don't realize the fundamental neuroanatomy is that the sympathetic chain of ganglia neurons in the spine, the thoracic spine, actually has projections into the adrenal gland that is what creates that burst of adrenal hormones and neurotransmitters to help you cope with that stress. What happens beyond just turning on your brain and turning on your what it feels like to feel amped up in a dangerous situation. Beyond that, what Jim is saying is it tends to push people into a strategy. Most people would call this posture. Jim hates that word for reasons I won't try to explain. Where their spine is
the only thing I hate is that there's a good or a bad posture. There's no such thing. There's the worst posture that you're in is the one you're currently in.
Right. And so what happens is it will create this posture, push you into a posture where your back is arched, which, as Jim was saying, is a great way to deal with a stressful situation. If you look at people who are running as fast as they can, if you look at people who are trying to deadlift a lot of weight, you go into the gym, virtually everyone is stuck in this posture. They can't get out of it, which is what Jim's talking about. But your stress response is fundamentally what puts you into this posture. People who don't live in our modern world, indigenous peoples, hunter-gatherers, the repetitive nature of their work being low level, low intensity, and relatively low stress helps keep them out of this one strategy or group of strategies and in a much wider variety or range of postures, poses, strategies, whatever you want to call them. They also give them periods of time. I mean, how do you stay really stressed out if you're walking 2.5 miles a day to gather food or water or firewood or whatever? We live go, 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 minute to minute, constantly being stimulated by our environment, often in if you look at almost all the content out there, it's either making you laugh, it's arousing you, it's freaking you out, or it's infuriating you. It's a vast majority of the content people are consuming today, which is why silence and time off of social media are so important. But with traumatic episodes, traumatic events, people will tend, and with lots of stress as extension of that, they'll end up stuck in this posture where they are extended. And part of the problem with that is it actually sends a feedback loop to the brain saying, we're under a lot of stress, we're under a lot of threat. Don't turn off, don't relax. And this also drives patterns of dysfunctional breathing mechanics, which have more and more effects downstream that Jim and I see, which is why one of the first questions we'll ask someone who's coaching with us or who's a patient at the practice, what is your respiratory rate on your fitness tracker, your Oura Ring, your Fitbit? I don't actually know which other fitness trackers measure respiratory rate. And that's part of why, you and I have for years liked the Oura Ring better than all the other fitness trackers. It's because it measures respiratory rate, which if I had to pick one piece of data from the Oura Ring or any fitness tracker to track, I think it would be respiratory rate, and it's almost tied with HRV. What do you think about that, Jim?
Yeah, I think the combination of the two is very valuable.
And
like yesterday, I had the data is just, and for type A people, people will poo-poo it. They'll be like, oh, you really shouldn't need that. Like, if you're really truly in touch with yourself. But like yesterday, I had some food I usually don't eat later in the evening, and it affected when my heart rate dropped in the middle of the night. So I see that. Well, if I decide to eat, something at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, ice cream, right, it's going to affect my HRV. It's going to, so right, you can actually see it. And whereas like type A people like myself, we just keep charging along, so when you see the data and how these things are affecting yourself, it allows you to make better choices and be like, oh, when I do X, it affects my heart rate when it drops in the middle of the night. When I do Y, another really neat thing about the Oura Ring, that I've used this with a ton of people, if you go onto the main page and you click on heart rate, it basically tells you, if you click on heart rate, it gives you the thing that pulls up that says restorative time, sleeping, workouts, daytime. And you can go back every day and see how much time you spend relaxing every day. And, I'll work with somebody like a lady, one in particular comes to mind, super successful type A, entrepreneurial type. And she's like, I'm tired all the time. I don't get it. What do I need to do? And we went through and we flipped back for 3 months on her restorative time. And she didn't have 1 minute of restorative time during the day. Not
Right.
one. So she started making an effort to take a few minutes every day to relax and calm down and just like go lay in a hammock for 5 minutes. And all of a sudden she started going from like 0 restorative time to 5 to 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And all of a sudden she started sleeping better. She started relaxing. She's like, oh, I feel so much better. She can look at the data and be like, oh, I'm running around like a fool again. I need to check myself before I wreck myself.
Right.
And
we see this all the time.
Yeah, it's great for people that like myself. Like I always describe type A people as like, you give them an axe, you tell them to go out of the forest and to cut down 2 trees, and they cut the whole freaking forest down. Like
right.
That's, the type of personality.
And let's bring that back to trauma, because we see so often that these high achieving personality types have got a lot of trauma they haven't dealt with.
Sure.
And what we see happening is that the people who've been in these traumatic situations, they never get out of the intense go, minute-to-minute survival mindset that they were in that setting.
Sure.
And it turns them into absolutely wildly successful people, the kind of people who people say, I don't know how you do it. How do you find the time? What is it that drives you? But a lot of the time what they're really doing is they're running from their feelings. And this leads to a lot of trauma ending up trapped in the body. And what people need to know is that trauma, from what we can tell, seems to literally get trapped in muscles, tissues, maybe even bone. It's a very weird, downright spooky thing that we see.
I would say the energy gets trapped.
Sure, we'll call it what you will.
Right.
But we see that when people deal with these emotional issues, give themselves time, space to rest, recuperate, recover. Sometimes I'll explain it to patients as this is your brain's got programs it's supposed to run to kind of keep house and perform a kind of mental hygiene. And it only runs those when you're not running around and super overactive. And so if you're never slowing down during the day, you're never going to do this. This is why people will, fall in love with meditations from guys like Joe Dispenza or Roy Masters, different types or schools of thought of meditation. They go from being constantly on the go, constantly overachieving, constantly being busy and worrying about stuff, to spending just 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, allowing their brain to work through these problems, these issues, these challenges they've had and experiences they've endured. And then all of a sudden that the trauma that's been stored in their body begins to release, and all of a sudden aches and pains that orthopedic surgeons or neurosurgeons or chiropractors or physical therapists had told them were their liver, their gallbladder, their low back, their SI joint, their piriformis will just release. And that's part of what and this is one of the things that really blows my mind. You have that school of thought over here with mind body medicine, and then you have all the other manipulative medicine and physical medicine, osteopathic manipulative medicine, chiropractic medicine. Some PTs will get into manipulation, right? You have all these other type, and then there's massage, and then within massage, there's so many different schools of thought in massage. And what I see you doing when you train people directly, and people should join our newsletter if they want to find out about opportunities to train with Jim. There's some new ones that are coming up. He's going to be launching a course in mid-June where there will be some opportunities to train with him live in a group setting. You help them correct or put them into a posture or strategy where they're not stuck in fight or flight, because you've put them into a position where the body is finally relaxing. And as you like to, tell the story often, people will cry when you get them out of that state of being revved up, and they don't even realize that they've been revved up for years.
Right. What I essentially do is give them variability. Right. And when you have variability,
what variability means to you.
Pardon me?
What does variability mean to you?
The ability, it's like blood pressure, the ability to switch between high and low blood pressure, the ability to fast and not be sick, and the ability to eat a piece of chocolate cake and be okay. Right. And so what happens is people generally in our world get stuck in the high threshold side of movement. And there's a really good book about this called When the Body Says No. That's a really great book that covers a lot of this. And it's interesting. The CIA actually looks for people that have had enough trauma, because people that have been traumatized are highly driven. They're looking for validation. They're also trying to like manage. I used to be like this, manage my demons by achieving things. So you're always going, you're always doing. That way you don't have to sit quietly and deal with a lot of this stuff in your head, because it's very painful and it's hard work to, to forgive people and to take the action needed. So the CIA actually looks for people that were traumatized enough to make them highly driven and motivated, but not so much to turn them into a psychopath or a sociopath, right? So it's very well known that mostly people that are very highly successful and highly driven have some sort of trauma, generally speaking. But the ability to switch from one side to the other, to steal a phrase from Paul Chek, the ability to work hard or work out, and then the ability to work in, which is like breathing, being present, Tai Chi, flowing movement, not movement that's trying to burn calories, but flowing, relaxing, restorative yoga, Tai Chi, these type of things. Most people in our modern world neglect those sort of things, like walking, low-level manual labor. I would almost classify mowing your grass into that sort of restorative movement kind of activity. We don't get enough of that side of things. So that's what I mean by variability, the ability to change shapes. So, a lot of the things that I do with people are to give them more flexion, because most people are stuck extended. So we take them to the other extreme so they can live somewhere in the middle, right? And then also making sure, like if you go to the gym, you're going to see people, all their pull downs are done with their back arched, locked together. Their rows, they're done with their back arched and locked together. Their squats are done like that. Their deadlifts are done like that. They're doing tricep kickdowns and they're arching their back. They're doing planks and they're arching. They're not reaching through their shoulder blades. They're not stacking their pelvis and their rib cage. Push-ups, they're dumped forward into their spine. So they're reinforcing this same position over and over and over again. It's no wonder, one of the reasons like ancient cultures, like particularly Asian cultures, don't have a lot of back issues. They go to the bathroom in a full squat, like every day.
Right.
They sit at a bus stop in a full squat. So what is a full squat? It jams your guts back into your low back and allows the guts to move backwards. When you're in this extended state, the guts are pushed forward. So people in traditional cultures generally spend a lot of time in a deep squat, which gives you access to flexion, which is the opposite of the run from a bear position, right? If you scare a toddler, they do this, right? They arch. So most of our modern life drives us into this arch. So just simply sitting in a deep squat, holding on to the door on each side of the doorknob with your knees together in a really deep squat, giving you some flexion, pushing your guts backwards, because your ability to shift your guts from side to side, front to back, and then breathe normally in these different positions is the things that keep you from getting into trouble. As soon as you lose the ability to move and shift your pressure, and then also you have to go into like a high threshold breathing strategy. The more you breathe, the better you can move. The less you breathe, the more stiff, stable, and the more force you can produce. So you just don't want to get stuck on one side or the other. You want to be able to switch back and forth between the two.
And one of the things I've noticed is that some of the most popular yoga poses that people like the most in their yoga routines are the ones that help them with exactly these issues. They love downward dog because it puts them in an inversion they're never in. If they're doing it properly, their pelvis and their rib cage are properly aligned. They love child's pose. Child's pose often, pulls the pelvis and rib cage into the right position if it's done, again, correctly. And then the other thing about, Asian cultures and low back is that one of the big problems with the human brain is that it's so open to suggestion that the suggestion that you might have or develop an illness can create the illness. So mind-body medicine physicians remarked because they knew about this association, they knew how powerful this was. And again, people are very hostile to the idea that just because they heard about, and this is actually part of why pharmaceutical marketing can be so damaging, if they're just suggesting to you that you have a disease, that alone can suggest to you that you're going to get it and increase your risk of getting it. That's part of why the pharmaceutical industry likes to donate money to nonprofits that are disease focused, right? Because they know that if that nonprofit is running ads, if they're doing advertising, if they're doing, 5Ks and whatever other promotional events that they're doing to raise money, that actually they're increasing the risk that you're going to develop the disease if the marketing is done properly, so to speak, for the pharmaceutical industry. And that's why very few of these nonprofits actually focus on practical tips for prevention of these illnesses. How many little ads or bloopers, or not bloopers, but blog posts or whatever do you see during Breast Cancer Awareness Month? How many of those are actual practical advice on what can prevent breast cancer? There's a laundry list of things that I help women understand that I believe will help save their breasts and help optimize their breast health. I don't see any of it in real mainstream medicine in the way that it could be, I believe, for exactly this reason. But to go back to what I was saying, if you tell the world about, say, an athlete developing a heel spur, like the example of this at the Mind Body Medicine doctors I've read about quote is that they feel like, or they noticed more people coming in with heel spurs after Larry Bird, the famous, was he a forward? I don't know. Celtics basketball player, developed a heel spur. And so, and we saw this very recently, the last 2 or 3 years. One of the things that doctors like me shook our heads at was the media saying this is so dangerous. Everyone needs to be afraid. You all need to stay indoors. Don't go out and socialize. You might catch something. The reality is, by telling people that, you actually increase the likelihood that they will catch it. And if you tell someone that a disease is more dangerous than it might otherwise be, or might actually be, you'll actually make it worse. And this is why you have to be aware of these things. Otherwise, you'll ultimately be manipulated into having illnesses and going down therapeutic roads that you don't need. The number of back surgeries in this country that are totally and completely unnecessary is would truly beggars belief. People find it hard to accept that back surgery is a I hate to say this, but back surgery is largely a racket. And if you talk to the docs who are really strict with their thinking about the benefits and risks of surgery, they will admit that behind closed doors. They, of course, are not making their money from back surgery, so they're not exploiting this fact. But a lot of doctors are.
Yeah, the rates of success with back outcomes is much higher with acupuncture, massage, chiropractic than it is with surgery, because surgery doesn't fix the underlying root cause of why you develop the issue, right? So, whereas going to a chiropractor or getting acupuncture where you're lying on a table relaxed,
right?
Half the benefits of acupuncture are just actually laying on the table and chilling out for an hour because you can't move because there's needles that'll be punched into you if you move in any way, right?
Yeah.
Or massage, getting you moved around in different ways, especially if they get into your guts and start moving things around in your guts and digging out below your rib cage. That changes outcome.
Yeah. So I think that's enough for today, Jim.
Yeah, that was very good. That was a good conversation.
Thanks everyone for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this. You can find out more about working with us through the link in the description below the video. As always, make sure that you like, share, or comment. We encourage you to share this with someone who needs it. And happy Memorial Day.
Yeah, we actually have a weight loss coaching program we're doing right now that you can check out in our link.
We do. That's open for enrollment until Wednesday.
Yeah. For the love of everything, for the love of French toast, get outside today. Go outside. Go for a walk.
Enjoy it. Take care, everyone.